While the OTF presents itself as independent internet freedom activists, their funding, staff, history and choice of targets all point to the conclusion that they are a digital weapon being used against Washington's enemies. The Open Technology Fund, OTF, is one of the most influential and celebrated organizations in the hacking and internet freedom communities. Well over 2 billion people globally use OTF-produced software, including communications app Signal and web browser Tor, services that are specifically marketed to privacy-conscious consumers looking to circumvent government censorship and surveillance. Yet its close links to the U.S. national security state raise many worrying questions about whether the world is making a mistake by trusting the organization and its products. Through its research and sponsorship, the OTF is responsible for apps and services that can boast a massive reach. It is estimated that more than 2/3 of all smartphones are equipped with OTF offerings, apps that brand themselves as the obvious choice for privacy-minded users. The OTF describes itself as an independent nonprofit organization committed to advancing global internet freedom, adding that it supports projects focused on counteracting repressive censorship and surveillance, enabling citizens worldwide to exercise their fundamental human rights online. There is strong evidence, however, to suggest that the Open Technology Fund is not what it claims to be, that it is neither independent nor truly committed to online freedom and privacy. First, while technically a private company, it is directly funded and controlled by the United States Agency for Global Media, USIM, a government body responsible for overseeing U.S. funded state media outlets overseas, including Radio Free Europe/Radio Liberty, Voice of America and Radio and Television Marti. The OTF derives essentially all of its funding from USIM, which, in turn, receives money from Congress through the Department of State, Foreign Operations and related programs, $808 million in 2019. Secondly, until 2019, the OTF was officially a government project managed by the infamous Radio Free Asia. Together, the New York Times described these outlets as a worldwide propaganda network built by the CIA. Even a brief look at their content suggests that this is essentially an accurate description, with USIM brought into existence to manage CIA-created media outlets. This alone would be enough to raise questions. However, the OTF's definition of freedom should sound even more alarm bells. In its most recently published annual report, it describes its mission as advancing internet freedom in repressive environments by supporting the research, development, implementation, and maintenance of technologies that provide secure and uncensored access to USIM content as well as the broader internet. This critical support helps to counter attempts by authoritarian governments to restrict freedom online. Internet freedom, according to the OTF, is explicitly defined in relation to access to U.S. state propaganda arms. If individuals in a country have access to Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, then their internet is free. If not, they live in a totalitarian state. Internet freedom boils down to the freedom of the U.S. government to reach you. Any other understanding of the concept is, at best, an afterthought. The report also states that the OTF exists primarily for two purposes. 1. To provide unrestricted access to the Internet to individuals living in information-restrictive countries to help ensure they are able to safely access USIM content, and 2. To protect journalists, sources, and audiences from repressive surveillance and digital attacks to help ensure they are able to safely create and engage with USIM content. This is unlikely to be the idea of freedom that many privacy-conscious users of Signal and Tor have in mind. That this operation is pointed specifically at U.S. enemies is made clear on the fund's website, which states that leading censors like China and Russia are exporting their censorship and surveillance tactics to like-minded regimes abroad, and that the OTF must capitalize on its unique capability within the U.S. government to support Internet freedom efforts, thereby positioning Washington as the unquestioned defender of liberty around the world. Of course, China and Russia do indeed have very serious censorship concerns, but they are hardly alone in that regard. Thus, while the fund speaks in the language of privacy and social justice, its targets are overwhelmingly U.S. enemy states. Meanwhile, American allies with equally poor or worse free speech environments, such as Saudi Arabia or Qatar, are quietly overlooked. A board of state functionaries. Not only was the Open Technology Foundation created by the national security state, it continues to employ high government officials in key positions. Its 5-person board consists entirely of important state functionaries. Karen Kornbluh was formerly U.S. Ambassador to the OECD, Barack Obama's policy director, Deputy Chief of Staff at the Treasury Department, and a senior figure at the FCC during the Clinton administration. Ben Scott was previously policy advisor for innovation at the Department of State, where, in the OTF's words, he crafted the government's 21st century statecraft agenda. Top Democratic fundraiser Michael Kemper served as the DNC's deputy finance chairman as well as deputy finance coordinator for President Obama. He also held a position on the White House Council for Community Solutions from 2010 to 2012. William Schneider is a Republican who was Ronald Reagan's Undersecretary of State for Security Assistance, Science, and Technology. He is also a member of the notorious neoconservative group, the Project for a New American Century. In 1998, he signed a letter to President Bill Clinton, urging him to attack Iraq. A science expert, he has consistently argued that the U.S. should use nuclear weapons as a standard part of its warfare. Even more central to the post-9/11 wars, however, is the 5th member of the board, Ryan Crocker. Crocker was United States Ambassador to both Iraq, 2007 to 2009, and Afghanistan, 2011 to 2012. So important was he to the occupations that General David Petraeus, Supreme Commander of the Occupation Forces, said that he was merely Crocker's military wingman. George W. Bush described him as America's Lawrence of Arabia. For such a group of individuals, who have spent their lives dedicated to enhancing U.S. state power, it appears unlikely that freedom from state surveillance would be high on their list of priorities. Underlining that the Open Technology Fund's concern with privacy and freedom of speech goes only so far is its choice of CEOs, who have included the former Director of Programming for Voice of America, the former President of Radio Free Asia, and an ex-State Department and National Endowment for Democracy official. Thus the OTF, a private company that was created by government agencies and was a government body itself until 2019, is staffed by top U.S. officials who have been chosen by the USIM. The veneer of independence actually serves two important purposes. It provides the U.S. government a modicum of plausible deniability if any misdeeds are exposed and ensures that the organization is not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests, making the OTF far harder to scrutinize. This semi-privatization technique is a new trend in U.S. statecraft. In recent years, the government has farmed out much of its most controversial clandestine work to NGOs and shadowy private companies that rely largely or solely on federal contracts. For example, NGOs like Creative Associates International have been employed to organize regime change ops in Cuba or act as a front group for the CIA in Pakistan. Last year, a private American security firm was also responsible for a failed coup attempt in Venezuela. OTF Genesis. Radio Free Asia, the Open Technology Fund's former parent organization, was established by the CIA in 1951, in the wake of the American retreat from China. Between 1945 and 1949, the United States occupied mainland China in an attempt to support the nationalist Kuomintang forces and prevent communist forces under Mao Zedong from coming to power. In this, they failed, and the Kuomintang fled to the island of Taiwan, just off China's coast. The powerful U.S. Navy prevented the communists from pursuing them, allowing the Kuomintang to establish a one-party state on the island. This remains the basis of the current U.S. China-Taiwan dispute. During the 1950s, Radio Free Asia bombarded the mainland with anti-communist propaganda in an attempt to weaken and, ultimately, unseat the Communist Party. However, results were poor and the project was put on ice, returning only in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union, when US planners began to believe a total eradication of communist states was possible. Yasha Levine, an investigative journalist and author of Surveillance Valley, The Secret Military History of the Internet, explained to Mint Press that Beijing began blocking Radio Free Asia's website almost as soon as it was launched in 1996. Consequently, its bosses began searching for a way of circumventing the Great Firewall of China. It was out of this project that the Open Technology Fund was born. OTF's role in US-backed pro-democracy protests. The OTF has played a key role in US-backed protest movements around the world. During the 2019 to 2020 Hong Kong protests, it was quietly channeling millions of dollars to protest leaders in an attempt to keep them going. It was also carrying out large-scale data gathering operations on Chinese social media platforms Weibo and WeChat. CIA cutout organization the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, was engaged in similar activities. For months, the Hong Kong protests dominated Western news media, with wall-to-wall positive coverage of the events. Yet locals themselves appeared to be far more split on the action. A poll conducted by Reuters showed that, by August 2020, only 44% of Hong Kongers supported the protest movement. The Open Technology Fund has also been crucial to Washington's activities in Cuba. There, it sponsored the development of Siphon, an open-source tool that allows users to hide their identity and bypass government restrictions. The NED had, for years, been spending big to build and train a network of activists across the island. When the time came, they were ready. During the protest in July, Siphon enabled over 2.8 million users to connect to the uncensored internet, allowing them to share their stories on social media and messaging apps, boasted the company's CEO, Michael Hull. Giving Cubans those tools so they can talk to each other is the most important thing that we can do, a senior Biden administration official told McClatchy's D.C. bureau. We're looking to further expand our support for the Open Technology Fund and those sorts of operations, they added. As with Hong Kong, worldwide media coverage of the Cuban protests was intense. Yet the demonstrations fell apart even quicker, as few Cubans had an appetite for regime change. The OTF is also known to have supported similar recent actions in Belarus, Iran, and Venezuela. In Belarus, it trained the opposition to President Alexander Lukashenko, its agents carrying out 10 separate tours of the country, holding meetings with representatives of what it deemed independent mass media, human rights defenders and civil activists. In total, it conducted at least 225 consultations with Belarusian groups in 16 months during 2017 and 2018 alone. They also provided training sessions for these activists. Sure enough, widespread demonstrations followed, with the goal of removing Lukashenko. The leaders of the movement were installed and maintained by the OTF, according to The Guardian. While these operations are couched in the language of promoting democracy, it is clear at whom the OTF aims its tools. In its latest published yearly report, for example, the words China or Chinese appear 81 times, Russia or Russian 27 times, Iran 24 times and Venezuela 13 times. Yet Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, 3 U.S. allies with particularly egregious media freedom records, are mentioned only once, in passing. An anarchist Lockheed Martin. This long and sordid history certainly raises questions about the legitimacy and safety of the OTF's two most popular products, Signal and Tor. Between 2013 and 2016, the OTF channeled more than $3 million to Signal, while it gave twice that amount, more than $6 million, to Tor between 2012 and 2020. Tor continues to be sponsored by a number of U.S. government agencies. Certainly, all parties involved keep this information quiet. There is no mention of the OTF on Signal's website. Meanwhile, reading the three organizations' Wikipedia pages would barely clue an individual in on their connections. This is not a coincidence. Emails Levine obtained under the Freedom of Information Act show that Tor project director and co-founder Roger Dingledine, who once interned at the NSA, was acutely aware of how bad the optics were.